You think you
boy,
belong
something's
here?
in there.
A damn vet living in a rusty trash can? That's not a neighbor. That's a problem. The voice came sharp and loud over the white picket fence. Laughter followed. Thin, sneering. Cole Brennan didn't flinch. He didn't even look up. Just sat still on the dented steel step of the shipping container, one hand resting gently on the thick coat of the German shepherd beside him. The dog didn't move either, but his golden eyes tracked every voice, every breath. Scout understood more than anyone guessed. They had arrived in Clearwater Ridge 4 days ago. No welcome signs, just cold stares and drawn curtains. Cole had bought the land site unseen, cheap, unclaimed, and just far enough from the center of town that nobody cared. Until he showed up in person. Until he started unloading what looked like a rusted-out freight box from a flatbed truck, like he was planting a metal tumor in the middle of suburbia. Someone filmed it on their phone. It made the local Facebook group. The caption read, "A real-life troll moves in." Guess even veterans lose their minds. They weren't completely wrong. Cole hadn't come here for redemption. He came here to disappear. The container was 32 feet long, painted the color of dried blood and long-forgotten battles. It groaned when the truck dropped it into place, the impact shaking the mud-soaked earth. It was a box built to carry machinery, now carrying one broken man and his dog. Inside, the air stank of salt and rust. But it didn't matter. Cole had slept in worse places. Burned-out hospitals, abandoned outposts, back seats of Humvees still stained with ash and sweat. Compared to that, this was paradise. His mother had passed 2 months earlier. Cancer, quick, cruel, and quiet. He hadn't been sober for most of it. The day after the funeral, his sister asked him to leave. The only thing he didn't argue was the dog. He grabbed Scout, packed his few belongings, and left Ohio behind. Now here they were. Scout was 8 years old, his muzzle graying, hips stiff, but his spirit unshakable. He had once sniffed out a buried IED with only seconds to spare. He had dragged Cole out of an ambush in Helmand Province with shrapnel in his leg. And when Cole stopped talking to people, stopped answering calls, Scout never left his side. Not once. Cole didn't talk to neighbors, but he saw them watching. He saw the teen boy across the street laughing as he filmed with his phone. He saw the retired couple muttering on their morning walk. He saw the woman in the Range Rover roll her eyes every time she drove past. He didn't care. At least he told himself that. But Scout saw it too. And Scout cared. Every morning, Cole and Scout walked a perimeter around the lot. Scout's steps were precise, not rushed, not lazy, purposeful, the way he used to patrol in-country. One loop around the edge of their land, then a second, a little wider. Cole didn't ask him to. Scout just did it. Like he needed to learn the lines of the place, memorize the rhythms, read the land the way only dogs and soldiers could. On the third morning, something changed. Cole was bent over, trying to get a rusted lock to give way, when he heard Scout growl. Not a bark, not a threat. A low, measured growl that vibrated from deep inside the dog's chest. Cole straightened slowly. Across the lot, on the other side of the overgrown grass, a boy, maybe 10, maybe 11, stood frozen. Skinny. Hoodie too big for his frame, holding a half-deflated basketball in one hand. Face pale as paper. Scout was between him and the container. Body rigid. Ears forward. Tail low but tight. He hadn't moved. He didn't need to. The boy dropped the basketball. I wasn't going to do anything," he stammered. Cole didn't say a word. Scout took a slow step forward. "Is he going to bite me?" Still no answer. The boy backed up fast, nearly tripping over the basketball. He turned and ran towards the neighborhood, disappearing between 2 tall hedges. Cole waited until the boy was gone, then looked down at Scout. "You made your point," he said. Scout didn't look back. He just resumed his patrol. That night, the laughter came again. From the fence, a couple of teenage boys this time, beer in hand, loud on purpose. "You should put wheels on that thing, man. Make it mobile. Tour the country. Show people how rock bottom really looks." More laughter. Cole sat inside, hands clenched on his knees. The sound of the generator was faint. The insulation was thin. Every word pierced through. He considered stepping outside, saying something. But Scout was already at the door, sitting tall, alert, silent. Not a sound from him, just presence, weight, authority. The voices outside hesitated. "Hey, is that a German Shepherd?" "Yeah." "He doesn't bark or anything." "Number, but look at him, man." Pause, then silence, then footsteps backing away. Cole exhaled. Scout looked over his shoulder, then walked back to Cole, curled up by the sleeping bag, and laid his head down. The next day, Cole found a dead squirrel nailed to the side of the container. There was no note, but there didn't need to be. He knew what it meant. Scout saw it too. He didn't growl this time. He just stood, eyes locked on the neighborhood, unmoving. Cole pried the squirrel off, wrapped it in an old tarp, and buried it at the edge of the lot. When he came back, Scout was waiting, still in place, like a statue carved from duty. He sat down beside him. "They don't get it," Cole murmured. Scout didn't move. "They think you're just a dog, but they don't know what you've done, what you've seen." Scout lifted his head, placed it gently on Cole's knee. "I'm the one in the box," Cole said, "but you're the one keeping the war out." That night, Cole couldn't sleep. He kept hearing voices outside, even when there were none. The memories returned in flickers. Red dust, black, smoke, distant thunder. He reached for the bottle that wasn't there anymore. His hand trembled, his breath caught. Then a warm weight pressed against his side. Scout, grounding him, silently, without judgment, without fail. The following morning, as Cole stepped outside, he saw someone watching again. But this time, it wasn't laughter. It was a woman, older, maybe late 60s, watering a row of rose bushes across the field. She didn't look away when he met her gaze. She just nodded. Not a smile, not pity, just a nod. Scout saw it too. His tail moved once, a quiet thump against the dirt. For the first time since arriving in Clearwater Ridge, Cole didn't feel like a ghost. He was still the man in the container. But now, someone had seen him. And Scout was still at his side, eyes steady, ready. Watching the town that had laughed, and waiting for the moment they'd finally understand who he was. Who they both were. The wind howled through the cracks in the container like a living thing. Cold metal groaned with each gust, echoing in the hollow space like a whisper from something long dead. The floor, slick with condensation, radiated a chill that crawled into Cole's bones. He sat hunched in the far corner, knees pulled tight to his chest, arms wrapped around them like a last defense. His breathing was shallow. His skin glistened with cold sweat. Scout lay near the door, head resting on crossed paws, eyes half-lidded but alert. His ears twitched at every creak, every shift of air. The old dog had picked his spot carefully. He could see Cole, the door, and the world outside, all without moving. He hadn't relaxed once since the first night. Cole was shaking again. Not from cold, not entirely. His hands trembled violently, and his jaw clenched against the waves rolling through his gut. He hadn't had a drink in 3 days. Not since the last motel in Idaho, where the walls smelled like bleach and stale cigarettes. He'd poured the bottle out in the motel sink. Watched it swirl down the drain like liquid fire, cursing himself even as he did it. Now his body was screaming. His brain felt like it had been set on fire and wrapped in barbed wire. Every nerve ending buzzed with static. Every memory came back, unfiltered, unsoftened. Helmand. That long, blood-soaked road. He blinked, and suddenly the rusted walls of the container melted into a field of red dust. Screams. A pop-pop-pop of gunfire, the sound of a Humvee door slamming, the coppery smell of blood mixed with burning rubber. Someone yelling. Then silence. Number not now. Cole gripped his head and pressed his forehead to the freezing steel. "Get out of my skull," he muttered, voice cracking. "Just stop." Scout shifted. He stood up slowly, padded over, and sat beside him. No sound, no theatrics, just his presence. Heavy, steady, real. Cole turned his head. The dog's eyes met his. No judgment, no pity, only recognition. Scout had been there too. He'd heard the same gunfire, smelled the same death. He had led point on missions through villages where no one came back, had once dragged a wounded soldier 20 feet under fire because no one else could reach him. They were both ghosts now, just different shapes. The tremors returned. Cole's hands curled into fists, trying to stop the spasms. His teeth chattered from a deep, sick cold that came from inside. He wanted to scream, wanted to rip through the container wall with his bare hands, wanted to run straight into town and find the nearest liquor store. But he didn't move, because Scout was there, watching. He had seen this version of Cole before, back in Ohio, when the nights were endless and the bottle never emptied. But back then, there were walls and excuses and voices behind doors. Now there was only steel and silence. "I don't know if I can do this," Cole whispered. Scout exhaled through his nose and leaned in, his shoulder pressing gently into Cole's. Just that. A shift in weight. Contact. Cole let out a shuddering breath and rested his head against Scout's neck. The dog was warm, solid, and smelled faintly of earth and something clean, something alive. His breath came slow and even, the rhythm of someone who had learned how to wait. It wasn't sleep that came next. It was a kind of collapse. Cole slid to the floor, Scout following him down, curling tight against his body like a living blanket. The tremors never fully stopped, but they dulled. The screams in his head faded into whispers. In the dark, Scout stayed, unmoving, unrelenting. When morning came, it was less an awakening than a surfacing. Cole opened his eyes to pale light, spilling through the slats he hadn't yet sealed. The floor beneath him was still cold, but the panic had receded. For now. Scout was watching him, alert but calm. He didn't nudge him, didn't demand, just waited. Cole sat up slowly, feeling every bone in his spine protest. His stomach rolled with nausea, but the worst had passed. For now, he forced himself to his feet, staggered once, recovered. Scout followed, rising with that same quiet dignity. Outside, the wind had died. The sky was overcast, but still. He opened the heavy door, and Scout padded out first, nose to the wind. Cole followed, blinking at the daylight. The world looked washed out, but real. It didn't press in on him like the night did. They walked the perimeter, the same path as before. Mud sucked at Cole's boots, but he kept going, step by step. Scout led the way, his gait slow but purposeful, like he understood that today wasn't about watching the fence, it was about keeping Cole moving. They passed the edge of the field, where the rose garden across the way shimmered in the distance. May was there again, trimming stems. She glanced up. Their eyes met for a second. She didn't wave, but she didn't look away either. Back inside, Cole ate half a protein bar and drank warm water. It tasted like tin. He didn't care. He poured the kibble into Scout's bowl. The dog waited, tail motionless, until Cole nodded. "You earned it," Cole said hoarsely. Scout began to eat. Cole sat in silence, back against the wall, watching him. The container was still cold, still ugly, still filled with rust and regret. But the dog didn't seem to mind. He finished his meal, licked his jowls, then laid back down beside Cole. No drama, no declaration, just there. And for the first time since arriving in Clearwater Ridge, Cole allowed himself to believe the fight might be winnable. Not easy, not soon, but not lost. Scout lifted his head, rested it on Cole's knee, and closed his eyes. That was enough. By the fifth morning, Cole had a routine. He didn't call it that, not out loud, but Scout knew. The dog rose at first light, stretched long and slow, and walked to the door with quiet expectancy. Cole followed without speaking. He always did. They walked the same perimeter, same rhythm. Down the right side of the lot where the blackberry bushes clawed at the chain-link fence, across the back edge where the earth dipped and held the last of the rain, then up toward the wide open space where the containers sat like a forgotten relic. Scout kept his steps even and his head low, sniffing with purpose but not alarm. Routine. It was a small thing. But for a man who used to measure time by deployment rotations and whiskey bottles, it meant survival. Scout ate at 7 a.m. sharp. Kibble first, then a splash of warm water from the boiled kettle. He waited for permission. Always. Cole couldn't remember teaching him that. It just became their unspoken agreement. By 7:30, Cole had his hands on tools. The container, once just a place to fall apart in, had become his next mission. He'd scoured the scrapyards on the edge of town and found old paint cans, dented tarps, rusted wire brushes, and exactly 2 good sheets of plywood with only 1 nail sticking out the side. He spent 3 days scraping rust from the container's walls, skinning his knuckles on jagged steel, and learning how the Montana weather chewed through metal like salt water. He worked in silence, save for the occasional click of Scout's claws as the dog moved to find shade. Sweat streaked through the grime on Cole's face. He never looked up when cars passed, but he heard them. Slowing. Rolling just a bit slower than they needed to. And yet, one presence was constant and quieter than the rest. May. She lived in the blue-painted house that backed up to the property, her yard a mess of raised garden beds and wind chimes. She never spoke to him, but she was always there. Most mornings around 10, she'd emerge from the back porch wearing a straw hat and gardening gloves, hose in hand. She watered her roses slowly, almost meditatively, stopping every so often to glance over at Cole. She never waved, but she also never looked away when their eyes met. That morning, as he sanded down a patch of rust near the door hinge, he felt the weight of her gaze again. He looked up. She was there, trimming the tall stalks of what looked like cone flowers. She paused, holding the shears still, their eyes locked. Scout stood up beside him, ears twitching. May gave the smallest nod. Nothing dramatic, just a subtle acknowledgement. And then she turned and went back to her flowers. Cole stared after her for a long second before returning to work. That afternoon, it rained. Not the gentle kind. It came hard and fast, pounding the roof like 1,000 boots marching overhead. Cole scrambled to cover the supplies with a tarp, slipping in the mud as Scout circled behind him, barking once as if to say, "Hurry up!" Together they pulled a makeshift flap over the entrance and ducked inside. The container leaked in 3 spots, one near the corner, another right over Cole's bedding, and the worst right by the food storage bin. He stared at the water collecting in the rusted seams, pooling near the back wall. "I should have burned this place instead," he muttered. Scout didn't move. Rain pounded for hours. It blurred the line between inside and out, cold air pushing through the cracks like fingers. Cole sat with his knees pulled up, staring at the drops trailing down the metal wall like tears. The ache started in his chest, low and familiar. that hollow throb of failure. He had been a soldier, a builder, a protector, and now he was a man patching holes in a glorified dumpster, hoping it didn't flood. He reached for the plastic jug of water, but his hand stopped mid-air. A memory had crept in without asking. His mother's kitchen, her voice. Her last good day before the hospital took everything soft out of her face. You always were the one who could fix things, Cole. Not just machines, people too. He gritted his teeth. Scout pressed closer, resting his head on Cole's boot, grounding him. Always. Cole looked around at the half-sealed container, the splintered tarp, the rust he couldn't scrub out no matter how hard he tried. Could he fix this? Or was this just another thing he'd eventually ruin? The next day the rain stopped. The sky broke open with that crisp, rare kind of sunlight that only shows up after a storm. Sharper, cleaner, as if daring you to feel something. Cole didn't stop to admire it. He got to work early, hauling out buckets, emptying the floor, and reinforcing the doorframe with whatever scraps he had. His hands blistered, his back ached, but he didn't care. By noon, he was standing on top of the container with a wire brush in one hand and a can of sealant in the other, when Scout gave a sharp bark below. Cole looked down. May stood at the edge of her yard. Not on the porch this time. She was closer, maybe 15 feet away from the property line, her arms crossed, but relaxed. "You've got a leak up there?" she called out, voice steady but not unfriendly. Cole blinked. He hadn't heard her speak before. "Had 3, he replied. "Down to 1 now," she nodded. "I've got extra roofing tar. Came with the shed I built. Might still be good." Cole hesitated. "I don't have anything to trade." "I didn't ask for trade." Silence. Then she added, "Don't let pride rot what you're trying to fix." Then she turned and walked away, disappearing behind her fence. Scout looked up at Cole. Cole looked down at the brush in his hand. The next hour he climbed down and walked to her gate. It was already open. A 5-gallon bucket of roofing tar sat just inside, lid snapped on tight, with a note taped to the side. "Use what you need, May." He didn't see her again that day. But when he sealed the last leak before sunset, and rain never came through again, he sat with Scout on the steps and stared out at the quiet town beyond. "Maybe I don't deserve to start over," he said softly. Scout didn't argue, didn't move, just leaned closer and rested his head on Cole's thigh, eyes watching the horizon. Maybe that was the answer. Maybe the question itself didn't matter as much as what came next. And what came next was tomorrow. Same time, same perimeter, same dog. One more day to prove that rust can be scraped off, even from a man like him. The rain didn't let up for 4 days. It started with a slow drizzle that smeared the window in a thin grey haze. Then came the downpour, a relentless hammering that turned the dirt lot into a swamp and beat the roof of the container like fists. The sky stayed dark even at noon. The air inside the box turned sour and damp. Everything was wet. The bedding, his boots, even the walls, which seemed to sweat rust. Cole stopped keeping track of time. The outside world disappeared in the storm's noise. He sat on the edge of his cot, knees apart, elbows on his thighs, eyes locked on nothing. His shoulders were hunched, spine curved in that familiar position of collapse. Scout lay in his usual spot, head down, eyes open, always watching. On the second day, the craving crept in. It didn't roar this time, it whispered, just one sip. The thought crawled beneath his skin like a tick, small and poisonous. He tried to shake it off, tried to focus on Scout's breathing, on the rhythm of the rain, on anything except the knowledge that the liquor store was only a 15-minute walk away. He made it through the second day. Barely. On day 3, he woke in a cold sweat, jaw clenched so tight his molars ached. His stomach twisted itself into knots, and his hands wouldn't stop shaking. He curled into himself, fists digging into his ribs, and bit down on a towel to keep from screaming. Scout didn't move, but Cole felt the weight of his gaze. The dog knew. He always knew. By the fourth day, Cole was done pretending. He stared at the corner of the room where his pack sat, rain-spattered and waiting. Inside was a crumpled $20 bill. Enough for a bottle. Maybe 2 if he bought the cheap stuff. That's all he needed. Just 1 drink, too. Shut it all down. The guilt, the noise, the ache. 1 drink to put everything to sleep. He stood. Scout lifted his head. Cole ignored him. He reached for the pack, then hesitated. Scout sat up, their eyes locked. "I can't keep doing this," Cole said aloud, voice thin, nearly broken. "I'm not strong enough." Scout tilted his head, his ears twitching. Cole zipped up the pack and slung it over his shoulder. He didn't look back as he reached for the door handle. "I'm sorry, buddy." He opened the door. The cold slapped him. The rain hadn't stopped. The air was thick with mud and the smell of pine and iron. He stepped outside. 1 foot, 2, the third never landed. Behind him, a sharp metallic clang echoed through the container. Cole froze. He turned slowly. Scout stood just inside the threshold. In his mouth, he held his empty steel food bowl. And then he dropped it. The sound rang out like a bell. Scout didn't move. He didn't bark. He didn't tilt his head. He just stared. It was 5 p.m., dinner time. Routine. Cole's heart slammed once, hard. He looked at the bowl, then back at the dog. Scout was soaked, but he stood tall, eyes locked on Cole's. There was no anger in them, no pleading, just a question. "Are you really going to walk away from me?" Cole blinked. Water streamed down his face, rain or tears, he couldn't tell anymore. His legs gave out beneath him, and he sank into the mud. Scout didn't move. Cole let the pack slide off his back and hit the ground with a dull thud. He buried his face in his hands and shook. Not from the cold, from shame, from the unbearable weight of nearly failing the only creature who had never given up on him. He didn't know how long he sat there. Long enough for the rain to soak through every layer of clothing. Long enough for the sobs to quiet. When he finally stood up, he reached for the bowl. Scout let him take it. Back inside, Cole filled it with the last of the kibble. His hands were still shaking, but they were steady enough to feed his partner. Scout ate like nothing had happened, because for him, nothing had. Cole had come back. That was enough. Cole lit the small propane burner, boiled water, and poured it over a handful of instant oats. He forced himself to eat. Scout curled up beside him when he finished, warm and solid. That night, the rain still fell. But it sounded different. It didn't feel like isolation anymore. It felt like protection. Cole stared at the ceiling, one hand resting on Scout's back, feeling the steady rise and fall of the dog's breath. He had nearly lost the fight. Scout had won it for him, with a single clang of a bowl. The rain had passed, not just the storm outside, but the one inside Cole too. Something had shifted since that night Scout dropped the bowl. It wasn't a miracle. The cravings still whispered, but they had lost their grip, like a predator that had missed its chance. Cole woke up the next morning with sore joints and a foggy head, but his hands were steady. For now, that was enough. They set out just after dawn. The air still held the scent of wet pine and churned earth, the kind of smell that reminded Cole of old forward operating bases right after a downpour, quiet, raw, full of hidden things. Scout walked ahead, his tail held low, nose twitching as he mapped the world through invisible signals. Cole didn't bother to steer him. Scout always knew where to go. They passed the edge of the lot and moved toward the tree line, where a patch of old Douglas firs stood like silent sentinels. Cole had never really walked this part of the property. It wasn't fenced. The underbrush had overgrown with years of neglect. But Scout slowed here, head dropping lower, paws stepping more deliberately. "Something got your attention?" Cole asked. Scout didn't answer, of course, but he gave a short huff and veered toward a thick base of an old oak tree, the kind that had been there long before the road was paved. He sniffed once, twice, then pawed at the dirt. Then he dug. Not playfully, not out of boredom. This was the focused, deliberate kind of digging Cole had only seen once before, in Afghanistan, when Scout had picked up the faint chemical trace of a buried IED. Same posture, same precision. Cole stepped closer. "You find something?" Scout didn't break rhythm. Dirt flew behind him in sharp, clean bursts. After a few moments he paused, nose hovering over the disturbed soil, ears pinned forward. Cole dropped to one knee and scraped at the ground with his hands. The dirt was cold, damp, packed tight. About a foot down, his fingers hit something hard. Wood, not roots. He dug faster now, heart thumping harder than it should have. It was a box, heavy, rectangular, a military-style footlocker rusted around the hinges, its green paint faded into something close to camouflage. The latches were stiff with corrosion. Cole pried one loose with a flat stone, then the other. The lid creaked open like a whisper from the past. Inside, tools. Real tools. Old American steel. A hammer with a thick, pitted head and a worn wooden handle. A set of wrenches heavy with rust but still solid. A hand saw, its teeth dulled but intact. There was even a box of nails, long oxidized but dry inside a cracked mason jar. They weren't junk. They were the kind of tools a man used when he built things that were meant to last. Cole didn't speak. He just sat back, letting the moment soak in. Scout watched him, ears perked. These belonged to someone who knew what they were doing. Cole finally murmured. Someone who made things. He touched the hammer. It felt familiar, like muscle memory was buried inside it. They dragged the box back together. Cole with his arms locked around the handles, Scout occasionally pulling the tarp it was laid on like a sled. It was the first time in a long time Cole didn't mind the sweat. Back at the container, he laid everything out on a towel and began sorting through the pieces. Most were covered in a layer of rust thick as dried blood. But they were good. Strong. You could feel the honesty in them. He found a piece of sandpaper and a small oil can he had salvaged from the trash pile behind the feed store. Then he got to work. He started with the hammer, rubbing, scraping, oil, then more sanding. Every stroke of the sandpaper peeled back something, first from the tool, then from him. With each strip of rust, something loosened in his chest. Scout sat close, head tilted, watching the process with his usual stillness. By noon, the hammer shone faintly in the sunlight. Not perfect, but clean. True, the weight of it in Cole's hand felt like purpose. He didn't stop. He moved to the saw next. Then the pry bar. He spent the entire day working until his hands blistered and his shoulders ached. But for once the pain felt earned. That night he ate rice and canned beans by the fire pit, Scout curled up beside him, tail tapping now and then. The moon lit the clearing in silver, the container behind them no longer looking like a tomb, but like a project. Cole ran his fingers over the hammer's grip. "I used to be good at this," he said, more to himself than to Scout. "I built walls, roofs, bridges out there. Not just in the army, before that too. People used to call me when they wanted something solid." Scout let out a soft grunt and rested his chin on Cole's boot. "I'm gonna build again," Cole said quietly. Maybe not much, but something real. The next morning, he got up before the sun. Scout followed close as always. First, he reinforced the hinges on the container door, Then he started replacing the bent steel latch with one of the stronger ones from the footlocker. It wasn't pretty, but it worked. The door finally closed without that awful screech. Later, he cleared the lot, pulled weeds, removed busted boards and rusted cans, used the pry bar to lift a twisted coil of fencing half buried in the dirt. People noticed. A car slowed at the corner. Someone inside watched. They didn't laugh this time. By the third day, Cole had framed a makeshift step in front of the container, just 2 boards nailed into concrete blocks. But it was level and solid. Scout lay in the sun nearby, eyes half closed, ears still twitching with every sound. Cole stepped back, looked at the structure, and exhaled. He wasn't fixed. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But he was useful. And in that moment, for the first time in years, that was enough. The morning started like most others. Scout nudged Cole awake with a cold nose just before sunrise, his golden eyes already alert. Outside, the air was crisp, the kind that made your breath visible and your bones ache if you stood still too long. Cole didn't mind. The ache reminded him he was alive, and not hungover. He filled Scout's bowl, then poured himself instant coffee from a chipped enamel mug. From the top of the container's makeshift porch, he watched the neighborhood wake up. People walked their dogs, but didn't look his way. A few joggers passed, quick to avert their gaze once they caught sight of the man in the military jacket and the weathered shepherd sitting like a sentry beside him. But someone did stop. An old Ford pickup rolled to a gentle stop just off the road, tires crunching on gravel. The engine shut off. A door creaked open. Cole recognized the man before he heard his voice. Tanner. He'd seen him a few times before. An older guy, broad-shouldered, thick hands, always in clean denim overalls and worn boots. The kind of man who didn't talk unless he had something worth saying. That morning, Tanner stood by his truck and studied the container with a carpenter's eye. His weathered face didn't move much, but there was something in his gaze. Sharp, measured, assessing. Scout stood, tail still, posture calm but ready. Tanner's eyes dropped to the dog. He listens, Tanner said finally. Cole nodded once. Every time. Another pause. You the one did the step out front? Yeah. Hand tools. Mostly. Some of it came out of the ground. That earned a low grunt of acknowledgement. Not approval, not disapproval. Just noted. Tanner stepped forward. He didn't bother introducing himself. He didn't have to. In towns like Clearwater Ridge, names were less important than reputation, and reputations traveled faster than most cars. Storm 2 nights back tore a strip off my porch roof, Tanner said. Ripped the flashing loose. Couple boards went with it. Cole waited. I got the lumber. Can't do the ladder work anymore. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Cole nodded. You want me to take a look? Tanner shrugged. You've got hands, and a dog that doesn't bark at shadows. That's good enough. They didn't shake hands. They didn't talk money. Cole tossed Scout's leash over his shoulder, grabbed his pack, and followed the man up the road. Tanner's house was a modest single story with a workshop that looked older than the roof it supported. The porch was wide, its edge curled up like an old book cover. A few shingles dangled precariously near the corner. Nothing flashy, nothing cosmetic. But it was damage that, left unchecked, would rot the whole entryway come winter. Cole climbed the ladder slowly, checking the integrity of each board with his boots. He pointed out where the joist had cracked and suggested a bracing pattern that would keep it level without tearing up the whole thing. Tanner listened silently, arms crossed over his chest. You served? The old man asked after a while. Yeah. Which branch? Army, combat engineer. Another grunt. Tanner looked up at the sky. Rain by nightfall. Then I'd better start now. Cole didn't stop working for 4 straight hours. Scout sat nearby the entire time, tail curled around his feet, occasionally sniffing the air, but never straying far. Cole moved with efficiency that came from habit, not haste. His cuts were clean, his hammering rhythmic, the kind of movement that turned muscle memory into meditation. Tanner brought out a thermos of black coffee and set it down on the porch without a word. Cole drank half of it without speaking, then wiped his hands and went back up the ladder. By afternoon, the new boards were in, the flashing secured, and the seams sealed tighter than anything the house had seen in a decade. Cole didn't rush the cleanup. He brushed the sawdust off the walkway, coiled the old extension cord, and wiped down every tool before placing it back in his bag. Tanner examined the work with slow, deliberate steps. He didn't offer compliments. He didn't need to. He stepped back, looked at the line of the new boards, and let out a quiet breath. "Clean," he said, stronger than before. Cole nodded, shouldering his pack. Glad it held. Tanner reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded stack of bills. Crisp 20s. He handed them over without counting. Cole hesitated. "I didn't ask for this much. You didn't waste my time." Tanner said, "That's worth more." Cole took the money, folded it neatly, and tucked it into his front pocket. As he turned to leave, Tanner spoke again. "Your hands aren't as rusty as that container of yours." It wasn't a joke. It was respect. Scout wagged his tail once and followed Cole back down the road. They walked the rest of the way in silence. The money in his pocket wasn't heavy, but the meaning behind it was. It was more than payment. It was proof that he wasn't invisible, that he could still be useful, that even a man who once dug holes to survive could now build something that lasted. That night, Cole bought Scout a new bag of food from the feed store. Not the cheapest kind, the good kind. Scout ate like he always did, quiet, clean, no begging. But when he finished, he walked over, rested his head against Cole's leg, and exhaled deeply. It wasn't just a job, it was a beginning. The storm rolled in overnight with a fury no one expected. The kind of southern thunderstorm that didn't whisper its arrival, but slammed into town like a freight train, snapping branches, flooding ditches, and turning dirt roads into chocolate rivers. Cole and Scout had taken shelter inside the container. Scout curled tight near the door, ears twitching at every gust of wind. Rain pelted the metal walls with the rhythm of war drums. But by dawn, the worst had passed. The air smelled like wet pine and diesel. Quiet again. Too quiet. Then the shouting started. It came from down the road, where the tree line bent near the old logging trail. A woman's voice, sharp, cracked, desperate. Cole stepped outside, Scout at his heel, both of them already alert. They didn't need words. It was May Tanner. She was soaked to the bone, mud streaking her jeans, and a frantic edge to her voice that twisted Cole's gut before he even heard the words. "My daughter, Lily's missing. She went out yesterday afternoon before the storm hit. She didn't come back." Cole didn't ask questions. He clicked his tongue once. Scout shot forward, nose low, tail straight. Cole followed. They started at May's porch. Scout sniffed the edge of the steps, then circled once before moving down the trail behind the house. His pace was fast but focused, ears flicking, head low, reading the invisible language written in scent. May followed, sobbing quietly. "She's just 12. She whispered. "She came home from her dad's yesterday, went for a walk with that little camera of hers. I told her to stay close, but she loves the creek." Scout turned suddenly, bolting toward the ravine that ran behind the old school property. Cole cursed under his breath and sprinted after him, boots sliding in the wet underbrush. Branches slapped his arms. Mud sucked at his feet. But Scout didn't slow. They reached the drainage culvert at the bottom of the hill. It was a long metal pipe, half submerged now with storm water, the mouth choked with branches and trash dragged in by the flood. Scout stopped, nose twitching, then let out one sharp bark. And again. And again. Cole dropped to his knees beside the pipe. He shoved aside the branches, eyes straining to see inside. At first, nothing. Then, movement. A pale hand. Small. Trembling. "Lily," he called. A faint whimper answered. "She's in there," Cole shouted over his shoulder. May let out a sound that barely resembled a cry, somewhere between relief and terror. "Baby, stay with us!" she screamed. Cole crawled part way into the pipe, the cold water up to his elbows now. The girl was lodged several feet in, her legs caught in a tangle of debris, her face pale and lips blue. "Scout, stay," he said firmly, knowing the shepherd was already trying to crawl in behind him. He stretched his arm as far as it could go. "Lily, look at me. I'm going to get you out, okay?" She blinked once, too slowly. Time was short. The water was rising. Cole backed out, grabbed a long tree branch, snapped off the end, and shoved it in like a makeshift pole. He wedged it against the junk pinning her legs, pushed hard until something shifted. A gasp echoed from inside. Then, movement. She was inching forward now. Cole reached in again. This time, her hand found his. He pulled. It wasn't graceful. It wasn't clean. But when they finally tumbled out of the pipe, Lily collapsed into his arms, shivering, barely able to cry. May ran forward and dropped to her knees, hugging her daughter like she might never let go again. But it wasn't over. Scout began barking, not frantically but sharp, insistent. His body was pointed toward the creek bank. Cole turned. Water. The runoff from the storm surge had loosened the slope above the culvert. A sheet of muddy water was charging down like a broken dam. "Move!" Cole scooped Lily up without thinking and shouted for May. She stumbled, slipped, but Scout dashed back and forth around her, nudging her legs, forcing her into motion. They cleared the pipe just seconds before the water smashed into it, churning debris against steel with a sound like bones breaking. They stood at the top of the slope, soaked and breathless. May held Lily close, sobbing now. Cole leaned against a tree, chest heaving, not from exertion but from everything else. The near miss, the image of that cold pipe filling with water, the girl's hand slipping into his. Scout walked over, shook the water from his coat, and sat beside him. They didn't speak for a while. May finally looked up through her tears. "If you hadn't found her..." She didn't finish. Cole just nodded, eyes still on the creek. "It wasn't me," he said softly. Scout knew. The old shepherd didn't move. He simply sat, watching the ravine, his ears alert, like he was still guarding something the others couldn't see. That night, word spread through town. Not just that Lily had been found, but that it was Scout who led the way. That the same grizzled shepherd folks used to avoid now had a place in every conversation, every grateful whisper, every prayer. And though Cole said little, he cleaned the mud off Scout's paws extra carefully that night. Because he knew some heroes didn't need medals or uniforms. They just needed to bark when it mattered most. The morning after the rescue, something shifted. Not just in the air, still damp and heavy with the scent of rain and pine. Not just in the trees, where the birds had started singing again, like nothing had happened. Something shifted in the town. People didn't look past Cole anymore. For months, he'd been just a man in a rusted shipping container with a dog that made some folks cross the street. To them, he'd been a question they didn't want to ask. An unknown, an eyesore, a maybe. But now there was no maybe. He was the man who crawled into a flooded pipe to pull out a little girl. And Scout, the scarred old shepherd with the limp and the greying snout, he was the one who found her when no one else could. The story traveled fast. In a small town, it always did. By midday, a news van showed up. the kind with satellite dishes and a too-bright anchor who tried to interview Cole in front of the container. He said no. Scout barked once, low and sharp, and the crew backed off. They left behind a drone shot of Cole standing in the mud, Scout beside him, both of them watching as the van pulled away. That night, Cole sat on an overturned bucket, Scout lying beside his boots, and listened to the quiet. Not silence. Just peace. Then came the first knock. It was Mrs. Denton from 3 houses down, holding a bundle of faded blue curtains and a can of white paint. "You probably don't need these," she said, not meeting his eyes. "But I figured you might want something to keep the light out in, the mornings." The next morning, someone left a roll of insulation at his door, then a small stack of lumber, a bag of dog food, a box of screws. No one asked permission. They just started showing up. Not everyone came in person. Some just left things, a coil of wire, a busted ceiling fan, even a battered coffee table with a note taped on top. "She's ugly but sturdy." And through it all, Scout kept watch. Never barking, never chasing anyone off. Just sitting, ears high, like he understood this was something new, something earned. By the 3rd day, Mr. Tanner stopped by. He didn't say much, just handed Cole a pair of old work gloves and nodded toward the pile of wood near the makeshift steps. "You gonna keep pretending you don't know what to do with all that?" he asked. Cole smiled, just barely. "No, sir." They started with the front step, then the overhang. Cole measured and cut while Tanner hammered. Scout supervised, occasionally sniffing at a 2x4 or nudging a nail into reach. Other folks joined in too. Jason from the hardware store lent them a saw. One of the teenagers from the gas station showed up after school and offered to sand down the door frame. Miss Lottie from the diner brought over cold sweet tea and a bag of still warm biscuits. No one made speeches. No one handed out plaques or medals. They just showed up. And slowly, the rusted container stopped looking like a container. It started looking like a home. They framed out a proper window, painted the outside a soft, dusty grey. Scout chose a spot near the front door, under the new awning, where the breeze came through and the sun hit just right in the mornings. By the end of the week, someone had even carved a small wooden sign and nailed it to the new porch. Scout's place. Cole hadn't cried during the storm. Not when he found Lily. Not even when the floodwaters slammed into the pipe. But he stared at that sign for a long time. "Didn't ask for this," he muttered. Scout just blinked up at him, tail thumping once. "Yeah," Cole added, softer now. "But maybe we needed it anyway." That night, Cole stood on the small porch with his hand resting on Scout's back, watching the sun sink behind the trees. He didn't feel like a ghost anymore. And Scout, scarred, limping, loyal, had become more than just a dog with a dark past. He was part of the story now, not the background, not a footnote, a name on the porch, a reason people believed again, a reason Cole did too. The envelope was plain, government issued. No return address, just a barcode and a seal from the Department of Veterans Affairs. Cole found it tucked into the side of the old mailbox someone had bolted onto the front of the container last week. It was crooked, made from rusted sheet metal and an old truck mirror, but it worked. He stared at the envelope for a long time before opening it. Scout watched him from the shade, tail thumping once when their eyes met. Cole gave a low whistle, and the dog padded over, settling beside him like always. Cole opened the envelope with steady fingers. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Standard V, a letterhead. Standard bureaucratic language. But the last sentence, he read that part twice. "Your service-connected PTSD claim has been approved. Monthly compensation will begin immediately." He didn't smile. Not exactly, but something in his chest eased for the first time in a long while, like a fist unclenching. Cole sat on the porch steps. Scout leaned into him, sensing the shift. Maybe it was the way Cole exhaled. Maybe it was the way the letter shook just a little in his hands. The last time he'd applied, years ago, they said there wasn't enough documentation, that the records from Fallujah had burned in a storage fire, that the dog didn't count. This time, someone had listened. Later that afternoon, Cole walked to the supply yard. He didn't buy a television, didn't buy a new coat or boots or even fix the truck still rusting in the back lot. He bought what mattered, a fresh bag of Scout's favorite food, the one with salmon and pumpkin that made him do a little happy spin every time. Then lumber, screws, a small propane stove, tiles in mismatched colors. Whatever was on sale. He was going to build a kitchen, not because he needed it, because it meant permanence. The sun had already dipped behind the trees when he got back. Scout sniffed the lumber, gave an approving grunt, then sprawled across the porch like he was guarding treasure. Cole opened a worn notebook from the army days. The edges were curled from heat and time. Most of the pages were still blank. He tore one out cleanly, picked up a pen, sat at the edge of the makeshift work table and stared at the wood grain for a while. Then slowly, he began to write. It wasn't long, just a few lines. Emily, I know I'm probably the last person you want to hear from. I'm not asking for forgiveness, not asking for anything really. Just wanted you to know. I made it. I'm okay. And there's a dog here who kept me breathing when I didn't want to. You'd like him. He paused, then added, Tell the kids hi. If they still remember Uncle Cole. He folded the paper in half, slipped it into a new envelope, and stared at it like it might burst into flames if he blinked. He hadn't spoken to Emily in 7 years. She was the one who picked him up from the base when he came home, the one who tried, for months, to help him re-enter a world that no longer fit. The one who watched him snap at her kids and sleep in the garage with the door half open, even in winter. The one who finally said, I love you, but I can't save you if you won't come back. And he didn't, until now. He placed the letter next to Scout's bowl, as if it needed one final blessing before it went out into the world. Scout nudged it with his nose and looked up at Cole. I know, Cole muttered. It's about damn time. Didn't expect a reply. Didn't need one. Some things weren't about answers. They were about finally saying the thing out loud. Later that night, Cole started laying out the frame for the new kitchen. Scout curled nearby, one paw twitching in a dream. And for the first time in years, the hammer in Cole's hand felt like something other than a weapon. It felt like rebuilding, like remembering, like hope. It started with a splinter. Cole had been sanding a slab of reclaimed oak when the thin piece jabbed under his nail. He cursed under his breath, then laughed. Not out of pain, out of something else, something sharper and deeper. Joy. It had been years since building something had made him feel that way. The bed frame was simple. No fancy joints, no stains or finishes. Just wood smoothed by hand and sealed with beeswax that smelled faintly of orange. The legs were thick, steady, the way a guardian should stand. He measured carefully 3 times just to be sure. It was for Scout. Not because the dog needed it. Scout had slept on dirt floors, on cold tile, on the front seat of a broken-down truck. He would have kept sleeping on the porch if Cole let him. But this bed was different. This was a thank you. For every night Scout had pressed his weight into Cole's chest during a panic attack. For the way he positioned himself between strangers and Cole's space without being asked. For the way he never looked away when the flashbacks came. And for never leaving. Not once. The bed went beside the wood stove, where Scout always liked to curl up. Cole added an old army blanket, folded thick, still faintly smelling of desert dust and diesel fuel. He even carved Scout's name into the side, each letter slow and deliberate. S-C-O-U-T. The S came out a little crooked. Scout sniffed it anyway and gave it a small huff, then plopped down like he'd been waiting for it all his life. Cole didn't cry. Not exactly. But when he stood back and looked at the space around him, the patched walls, the mismatched windows, the ceiling strung with warm Edison bulbs flickering like fireflies, he felt the weight of something shift inside. The container was still the same size, but somehow it felt bigger, warmer, alive. That night the wind rattled softly against the metal siding, but inside it was all quiet breath and soft pause. Cole lay down on his own mattress, no longer just a sleeping bag over plywood, but a real bed now, with a frame and corners and sheets that didn't smell like mildew. Scout rested his head on the edge of his own bed, close enough to touch. His ears flicked once, then stilled. The fire glowed in the stove. Shadows danced on the walls. Cole turned on his side, facing Scout. "You remember Fallujah?" he whispered, even though he knew Scout was already drifting off. "I didn't think we'd make it out, but you did. You always knew the way." Scout's tail thumped once, in his sleep. Cole closed his eyes. He didn't dream about gunfire that night. Not about blood or fire or the girl in the green dress he never found. He dreamed of a porch, of Scout running across the field toward him, ears flapping like wings, of laughter. And for the first time, he didn't wake in a cold sweat. He just woke. Whole. As the morning light pushed its way through the cracks in the window, Cole stretched, scratched behind Scout's ear, and sat up slowly. Coffee was waiting. So was the day. He picked up his notebook and flipped to the back. Another letter? Maybe. Or maybe just a note. A way to mark the moment. He wrote, "He stayed. That's why I made it." And then paused, looked around the small, imperfect, hard-earned home. At the wood, the warmth, the dog who had saved him more than once. He added, below the line, "What about you? Has anyone, animal or human, ever stayed for you when no one else did?" He left the question there, unanswered, because maybe, just maybe, someone reading it would remember. And if you're one of them, if a dog ever saved you in ways words can't quite touch, maybe this is your sign to tell someone, or to stay for someone. If Scout's story moved you, share it. Support your local shelters. Hug your dog a little tighter tonight. And if you believe in second chances, human or K9, consider subscribing to our channel, because every bark, every scar, every story matters. And somewhere out there, there's another Scout, still waiting to be seen.